afternoon, everyone. I'm Jim Walker. I am the Chief Technology Officer and Evangelist for the UiPath Public Sector. As you know, we're here at Forward 4 in Las Vegas. We had a public sector summit scheduled for Monday. And as most things in the world right now, COVID always has some type of impact. And so our government speakers who agreed to speak have now agreed to do a Zoom session for you to just give you their presentation so that you will be able to take away some of that information back to your home. Very excited to have with us today Ben McGrain. He's the Acting Assistant Director for Incident Procurement Operations at the U.S. Forest Service. And with that, Ben, I'll turn it over to you. And again, thanks for being here today.
You bet. Thanks again, Jim, for the opportunity to present. I was really looking forward to this all year, so it was a disappointment for us to not make this in person, but hopefully we can meet again at 4 or 5.
Very good.
So a little background. My organization, again, the USDA Forest Service, awards and administers the private contractors hired to support the agency's wildland fire and incident support mission. For context, nearly 50% of our firefighting resources are contracted, which includes over 5,000 individual contracts, over 10,000 individual resources, with an annual expenditure of $1 to $1.5 billion annually, depending on the severity of the fire season. Similar to contingency operations with the military, the Forest Service contracts for numerous resources and supplies such as aircraft, hand crews, engines, heavy equipment, and retardant. Our RPA journey was therefore triggered by various mandates and audit findings that found many of our legacy procurement processes and systems to either be non-compliant of those mandates or simply outdated. This legacy process that we use for our procurement really relied on a decentralized spending chain model, an independent system for requesting, ordering, procuring, and reporting those incident contracts and expenditures. Therefore, we were tasked with developing manual processes to mitigate those findings and ultimately utilizing those legacy systems and processes. Once we went through with that manual reengineering process, we determined that to meet those mandates and requirements, we would require approximately 5,000 to 10,000 labor hours a year to do those manually. And as this little, so what that led us to naturally was looking at some automation opportunities. And our efforts therefore have focused on more on the cost avoidance side by automating each of the links of that procurement spending chain. Again, we started by re-engineering all of our manual processes, workflows, and inputs to ensure data was consistent and validated. And once we settled on those manual re-engineered processes, we used those as the blueprints for our process design phase, which allowed us to ultimately fill in those manual gaps between those enterprise systems with RPA automations. As the graphic depicts, these are the various steps of our procurement spending chain. That includes everything from the time our incident resource is ordered or requested to when it enters our procurement system to record obligations. That procurement system has inherent interfaces with our financial system to record the obligations, as well as our reporting systems. But then ultimately, after that obligation is recorded, it moves on to our payment process and ultimately the closeout. So again, our focus has really been on automating each of these steps along that incident procurement spending chain. To date, we have a number of bots that are supporting the various spending chain activities. We currently have 6 bots in production. 5 of these are focused on either creating or modifying existing contract obligations, and one of our newer ones is focused specifically on processing invoices in the invoice processing platform system. Looking ahead, we're also working on another bot to help automate the contract closeout after performance has been completed. And our most recent one is the document understanding OCR tool to help read form data and generate reports for additional workflows. So for today's demo, I wanted to highlight the bots that are specifically supporting our aviation program. And to put this in context or perspective, when you see an air tanker on the news that's dropping retardant, there's actually 3 different bots that the Forest Service is utilizing behind the scenes to support that activity. Our agency has a fairly intricate accounting model. So for example, each of the flight legs, each time an aircraft launches or flies, and each time a load of retardant is dropped, we have to record and capture the quantities, the incident specifically that it was dropped on or flown against, and also all of those accounting codes and various payment items and information. So ultimately, what our bots are doing is helping us track all of that information through other independent systems, and then with the help of RPA, processing those actions, those obligations, those invoices, et cetera, to record all of that activity appropriately. So looking again at the different bots that are related to the aviation program, I first wanted to focus on simply what we refer to as our Aviation Bot that manages the contract obligation by receiving an input file from an independent flight tracking system that summarizes the aircraft's usage. This includes all of the activity related to that flight, including its flight time, the pilot hours, and also all of the accounting codes that we use to charge each of these pay items for processing in our procurement system, which ultimately reports back to our USA spending.gov reporting site. The way this bot works, we have an input file that's emailed to the bot's inbox. So the bot has access to an Outlook email inbox, and then consumes the data on these reports. It proceeds to reference a SQL lookup table to determine the contract type and appropriate actions to take. So we do have a few logic steps built in on these lookup tables to help determine the contract type. And based on the action and the coding that comes through these tables, the bot has a process built behind it. So prior to logging into the procurement system, though, the bot has already subtotaled all of the dollar amounts on those invoice reports. It's tabulated and summarized the different accounting codes, and also concatenated the input data to ensure that it syncs with our systems where the data will be consumed. Once that calculation is done, the bot logs into our procurement system, locates the applicable contract, and then completes each of the required fields, including the FPDS record that reports to USA spending.gov. Ultimately, the bot approves the action on behalf of the contracting officer, and no human interaction is needed to complete the action. The Aviation Bot completes its process by uploading an activity log to a SharePoint folder, which in turn will be used later as an input file for our IPP payment bot. For a visual, this is a simple process flow. So again, what I just discussed, this is an example of an input file that's sent to the bot. The bot calculates and subtotals the information on the input file. passes it along again to our procurement system. After it's done with its activities in the procurement system, it then produces these 3 different outputs. So again, we have an activity log that's loaded on the SharePoint site, the obligation and FPDS USA spending record within the procurement system itself, then also that output file capturing the bot's activity is ultimately passed along to our IPP input bot. All right, I did want to share a quick demo. This is our bot logging in to our procurement system. So this is after it's received, that input file, done its subtotaling, done its calculations. It's now navigating through our procurement system to locate the applicable contract, and through a series of, again, hard-coded logic hard-coded steps within the process. Also some logic built in with the lookup tables. Each of these fields then are ultimately completed and entered for every required field in our procurement system. So the bot knows, again, which contract to find, which line item to locate. Our line items, for example, reflect different aircraft. So via the lookup table, it knows which aircraft to find and perform the action against. It's now navigating through, again, many of these fields we've been able to hard code. So it's simply lookup table references. But again, with each of these steps, the bot has already cached the information it needs prior to accessing the system. I mentioned we have a fairly complex accounting model, or intricate accounting model. So it's concatenating our accounting codes in the right formats that will allow our system to accept them. And then ultimately, as it repeats that cycle, it is completing as many funding lines and contract line items that are necessary to approve the action. The final step that the bot takes within our procurement system then is really been one of our bigger time savers, where it's ultimately logging into our interfaced FPDS reporting system. Again, with FPDS, at least for our procurement system, it reports all of the expenditures and obligations to USA spending, which in our experience has been a very time-consuming endeavor. So we're very pleased with the automation related to FPDS to get those reports done, not only for us, but in a much timelier manner. This has been a challenge with our audit findings. So this is an example, again, of that report that is being completed. The bot, again, is entering each of the fields. This is primarily hard-coded with lookup table steps, but there is some logic built into if-then scenarios, for example, on some of these fields. So once the bot then completes that record, it accesses back into the finance or the procurement system and ultimately approves the action for us. So again, this is our one of our automated steps where a human no longer has to access the system to approve an obligation. All right, in conjunction with that Aviation Bot, we also have another bot that's used to modify and capture obligations and capture the different accounting information for the actual retardant that's dropped. So again, every time that load of retardant is dropped, prior to those payments being processed or made, we refer to it as our bot 18, and it is adjusting the obligations to reflect the fire information and accounting codes from where that retardant was dropped. It's very similar to our Aviation Bot, but we have different contract types and there's a few different steps required. So ultimately, we utilize a separate bot to manage those obligations for us. And what ultimately, though, similar to our Aviation Bot, this output file is also used as an input file to IPP. All right, so that last bot related to this entire process is our invoice processing platform, or IPP bot. This bot is designed to receive input files for invoices that have already been received and accepted by the government and are ready to be created in IPP. Note, this process is a little contrary to typical government invoicing, where we're actually generating the invoices on the vendor's behalf. So the vendors are not required to access IPP in this case. But again, as an example, those output files from both bot 18 and 32 are sent as input files for the IPP payment bot. In a similar workflow, these files are submitted via email. The bot is monitoring that email inbox, and then ultimately it's consuming the data from the input files, logging in then to the IPP system on the human's behalf to record and create those invoices for us. At this time, we are still requiring a human to do final approval, but our ultimate goal is to have the bots approve those on the human's behalf as well. All right, go back. This is a quick video of our IPP bot. A little technical difficulty here, but ultimately what our IPP bot does, it is, again, capturing information from those output files. It is logging into the IPP system. It locates that appropriate, in IPP, it's called a purchase order. So it finds that appropriate purchase order, records all of the information. It's, again, scraping this from input files. We have logic built in, so it locates the appropriate line items on the invoice within IPP. It's pulling forward the amounts and respective amounts for each line item. And then also, we've built in a step where the bot is uploading a PDF file of that actual invoice. So we have a process where we store our actual invoice files on a SharePoint site. The bot is coded to locate it based on invoice naming and numbering conventions, locates that file, uploads it into IPP, and queues that up for our human approval. All right, and just to close up here, one of our other complementary efforts to our RPA efforts has been development of some dashboards. And we've been able to help tell our story, help visualize some of the data that our bots are administering for us through our Tableau dashboard displays. So for example, all of these RPA actions that were demoed today would appear on some of our various dashboard views. And we're also in the process of working on more of a bot operational dashboard to help monitor performance, measure KPIs, measure ROI, and all the other related data to manage the status of our bot activities and actions. All right, and last, so even though we are entering our third year of our journey, we do feel like we're still just scratching the surface with RPA. We're very excited to start development with our first machine learning application on our UiPath document understanding OCR tool. We'll be using this to, again, read and scrape data from various paper forms, generate different input reports, and then we're really excited about connecting this to existing RPA workflows. Equally excited about standing up our action center. Now, this will be used to integrate various human-in-the-loop workflows, primarily for approving and rejecting documents and invoices and records, for example, but then ultimately incorporating those actions from the action center back into our existing RPA workflows. All right, so in closing, I just want to take a minute to thank USDA OCIO, the Digital Infrastructure Service Center, or DISC, for helping us through our journey and hosting our RPA efforts. The SEIC RPA development team for the development of our various bots and ongoing automations. And then, of course, UiPath for the software. And again, Jim, thank you very much for the invite.
Oh, hey, listen, that was amazing, Ben. I've got some questions for you. Let's see what we can do with them. So aviation obligation bot, return on investment. It didn't sound like that this was a return on investment like we normally think in private sector of dollars. It sounded more like throughput, compliance, and error reduction. What do you use as a criteria to decide what processes you want to automate?
Yeah, good question, Jim. And that has been, at least with our initial RPA developments, has been more of that cost avoidance perspective. So in our case, we had to map out and determine how many labor hours it would take to perform these tasks manually. And ultimately, that's the decision we were faced with, was either we do this manually or automate. So in our case, we are still looking at this from a cost avoidance perspective, primarily labor hour avoidance at this point. But as we start to mature with our model, we definitely are starting to take a look at savings in the terms of return on investment.
So we had Mike Pascal from U.S. Customs and Immigration Service, and he had a little video. Midway through the video, he said, go big or go home. I've seen in 97 agencies now automations, and I'll be honest, I've not seen anybody that's taken the big leap that you guys have. You have said in several times today, we're trying to eliminate the human work in this place and this place. What's your workforce think about this? Is this a yay, they're taking work that we didn't want to do, or is this a problem for you long term?
Yeah, I would say that's definitely a mixed bag in terms of the overall perspective. Again, a lot of our processes are fairly outdated. We rely heavily on paper, for instance. So, when we start looking at tools like document understanding, in Action Center, we see these as potential game changers for us because we do have a small army of people that we hire to help with this on a seasonal basis. So, at least from the sphere of influence that I'm involved with procurement and the incident procurement side of this, we feel like this is a major evolution for us to one, get into our proper procurement systems, and then two, we're making these more compliant, or not to use a term lightly, but we feel like there's a lot of audit proof armor that we're building for some of these processes. So again, I do feel like once these mature a little further, and especially once we have our hands on document understanding after a year, I think we have a lot of opportunity to expand this into further business practices.
Got it. Last question for you. What's your team look like? Who's building your bots? Who's doing your business analysis in that?
Right. So we did dedicate a core team for, we refer to it as our incident procurement modernization. So we have a core team of procurement professionals on the business analysis side. But of course, we have a contingent with our SEIC development team, where we hire the developers on that team. But I would say, it's roughly 5 to 6 people that have been involved with, the key process design, the development, and the testing. But that also includes, we have a major operational workload on top of that. So, and that includes this last year processing about $400 million of obligations and payments in addition to our RPA development.
Got it. Well, Ben, I do want to thank you. We mentioned this when you and I first started talking. I like your example because you tie it to the mission of the Forest Service. Too many times people think of bots as a back office activity. And while it is, it's that activity just beyond the back office that really works for people. So I really appreciate you being here today, and thank you.
No, you bet. Likewise. And I hope there's a forward for that we can meet in person.
There will be one. We're looking forward to it. Talk to you later, Ben. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot.
Yeah, bye.